Well, there's been much debate this week in Ottawa between the Conservatives and the Liberals, not to mention Alberta piling on. Here to discuss it all is Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley joining us from Toronto. Brian, so great to have you on once again today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Alberta's Justice Minister has said no, this province won't be helping implement the federal government's so-called buyback or gun confiscation program, saying it would take away local resources. So the feds are saying that this is Alberta picking and choosing which laws to enforce. So Brian, what's your take on this?
My take is that the Alberta government is actually reading the Provincial Police Services Agreement that they've signed with the federal government, and the federal government isn't doing it. For people that don't know, there are 7 provinces that use the RCMP as their provincial police, and under that agreement, that's what they're referred to as. They're not referred to as the National Police Force. And we all think that every Mountie is part of the National Police Force. But if you're doing local or provincial policing, you're under a Provincial Police Services Agreement, whether it's with Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the 3 maritime provinces. That's what the Mounties are doing there. They're the local cops. And so under 6.1 of that agreement, it says that the province in question gets to set their priorities, goals, and objectives. Under 6.4, it says that nothing in this agreement will stop insert province's name here from being in charge essentially of provincial policing in their province in setting those goals. And Tyler Shandro, Alberta's justice minister, has clearly said, look, we're stretched thin as it is. And I think the number is Alberta pays $750 million a year for the joy and benefit of using the RCMP. Get your own provincial police force. And they're being asked, please take resources away from, looking after street crime, looking after traffic enforcement, looking after the things that people say matter to them. By the way, traffic enforcement, every police jurisdiction in the country, it's the #1 issue. People want the speeders on their street stopped until they themselves are stopped. The feds are asking Alberta, take those resources off the streets, give them to us to help run this program. This is all because the federal government didn't plan this out properly. They came up with this idea before realizing they don't have a way to implement it.
Okay, yeah, I think it was a good point that you brought up too there. Kind of good education too, that the RCMP isn't the federal police force. And I think a lot of people do think that. So yeah, thanks for clearing that up. Okay, so Brian, there's been lots of debate in Ottawa about what's being said in the Commons, what can be said, and what the government is doing. So let's start with what they're doing. The Conservatives say they're going to raise taxes on Canadians at least 3 times in the next several months. The Liberal dispute, they dispute this, of course. So what's the truth here?
The truth is the Liberal government is going to raise taxes 3 times over the next several months. There's going to be an EI payroll tax increase. There's going to be a CPP payroll tax increase. And both of those are on January 1st. And then the carbon tax goes up on April 1st. But by the way, so does the escalator tax on alcohol. And I believe it might also go up on cigarettes as well. That's a dwindling group of people that are going to pay the cigarette tax, but tobacco use, it still does generate significant income for the government. So you've got a bunch of taxes going up in the next few months. The Conservatives have been focused on the 2 payroll taxes and the carbon tax. On the carbon tax, the Liberal attitude seems to be, well, but it's all good. It's for the good of all of us, so be happy you're paying it. And by the way, EI and CPP aren't payroll taxes. Here's the problem. On the federal government's own website, they're described as payroll taxes. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Despite all the people saying, oh no, those are fees for service and you pay your EI premium so that you can access EI, and you pay your CPP premium so you can access your Canada pension plan later on. Okay, one, that's not a real argument. There's still payroll taxes for the employee, but employers also pay these. And an employer doesn't get to claim EI if the employee is suddenly laid off. And the employer doesn't collect the pension when the employee retires, but they have to pay the same premium that the employee does at the same time. So these are absolutely payroll taxes. Justin Trudeau even questioned the conservatives when he was just Liberal leader of the third party back in 2013. I posted the video on my social media. He stood up and demanded to know why the Harper government was increasing EI premiums, what he called, and I quote, a direct payroll tax increase. And he cited a guy named Dustin in Calgary as being the one that gave him that question. So, look, the Liberals are trying to be too cute by half, claiming two of the three aren't taxes at all, and claiming the third is just something we should be happy to pay. At a time when we're dealing with an affordability crisis, when the cost of living is going up, having the government add to that isn't a winning political strategy. So I'm not sure what they're thinking. You know, Jean Chrétien may not be the most loved politician in Alberta. I know his Liberal Party didn't do very well out there. But guess what? Someone like Jean Chrétien would look at this and go, you know what? I'm going to do the smart thing politically, and I'm going to delay these increases until we're not dealing with 7, 6, 8% inflation.
Okay, Brian, some debate on a term that the Conservatives have been using a lot in the Commons, particularly new leader Pierre Poilievre. And he's been quoted as saying just inflation. So can you say this in the House, or is this one of those words that shall not be heard, one of those forbidden terms?
It depends on how you say it. I say that you can say that it's just inflation. But if you pronounce it wrong, if you say just inflation, then the Speaker of the House is going to call you out. Here's the nuance. And look, there was a Canadian press story out last week that said this is forbidden. You're not allowed to say it. The Speaker's ruled on that, but some MPs are still trying to say it. And I wrote a column saying, that's not true. You can say it. You've just got to say it right. And when Pierre Poilievre stands up in the House of Commons, he always does this pause and he says, it's just inflation. Like he puts the little nuance in there so that you know that he's blaming it on Justin Trudeau, but he's not saying the prime minister's name. And the reason for that is you're not allowed to call each other out by name. This is a standard rule of the House. Justin Trudeau can't stand up and say, Pierre, what are you talking about? You have to call each other by the title. So the prime minister, the leader of the opposition, the MP for Thornhill. Now, I'm going to pick on the MP for Thornhill, Melissa Landsman, because she's one of the ones that got called out for saying this, because the way she pronounced it last week was Justinflation. And she put the emphasis on Justin, which, of course, is the PM's first name, as I said. So the Speaker stood up and he didn't say, you can't ever say this. He said, if you're going to say it, make sure the pause is in the right place. So, look, MPs always get around the rules. One of my favorites is, you don't want to call somebody a liar because that's not allowed in Parliament. You can say that they're not familiar with the commandment, or that they're economical with the truth. These are things that have been said in the Commons. So if you want to say it's just inflation, you got to put that little pause in there. That's the difference.
Oh my goodness, how funny. Okay, so one of the taxes that will be raised next April, you alluded to it earlier, is on alcohol. So the government is tasked with coming up with guidelines for what's considered a safe amount of what a safe amount of alcohol is. Now they're trying to say that anything more than 2 drinks a week is too risky. So is this a bit extreme?
It will be for an awful lot of Canadians because 2 drinks in a week, okay. I always love these stories you see. They interview some old lady that turns 100 or 105, and they say, the reporter always says, what's the secret to a long life? How many times have you heard them say, I just have a little shot of sherry every night, something like that,
Or I
right?
drink my
You know,
wine every day.
yeah, and it's cute. Like, I just have the one every day. That person who's 105 would now be considered outside of the norm. That's risky. You're going to get cancer. You're going to die. Well, they're 105. Based on my experience with my grandmother who lived well past 100, at some point they're saying, is it over yet? So, but look, it's saying that this is unacceptable behavior by the government is too much. For years, the standard has been, the recommendation has been anything over 10 drinks in a week is for women is too much. Any more than 15 for men is too much. And they give those general guidelines because Men tend to be larger, they tend to weigh more. All of these are factors. Now, nobody would ever say, have all 10 drinks in a night, have all 15 drinks in a night. But, that works out to between 1 and 2 a day. And that is considered a normal and acceptable way. And it's the government trying to say, don't drink too much, drink within moderation. Um, this is kind of like the temperance movement coming back and saying, because what they actually say is you shouldn't drink at all, but if you're going to drink, you shouldn't have more than 2 in a week. Well, if you're trying to curb people's drinking, that's the wrong message, because this is a group that also says they want free heroin for heroin addicts. So heroin's good, but a glass of wine a night is bad. That's not a public health message that people are going to follow. They're going to ignore it. And that's the opposite of what you want to do. This is all funded by a group called the Centers for Substance Use and Addiction. Now, some people will say that's not the government, they're independent. The Deputy Minister of Health and Deputy Minister of Public Safety sit on their board. Most of their money comes from Health Canada. Most of the board is appointed by the government. They wouldn't exist without the government. And they were tasked to do this by Health Canada. So it is the government, the nanny state essentially, coming in and saying, you shouldn't do this. If you want to reduce problem drinking, this isn't the way to go about it. This is going to make problem drinkers scoff at you and say, yeah, you're just being beyond the pale now. You're being ridiculous. I'm going to ignore you. Wrong way to go about it from a public health perspective. And an awful lot of doctors have come out saying this is the wrong message to be sending as well.
Wow, interesting. Okay, Brian, the inquiry into the Emergencies Act was supposed to start last month. It was put off for the presiding judge to have surgery and then recover. So the latest news is that Prime Minister Trudeau will testify. So do we know when, and did you expect this?
I don't believe we have the exact date yet. It's going to be a few weeks away, but no, I wasn't expecting this. Prime ministers can, just bow out of these sorts of things all the time. So I guess I have to say kudos to Prime Minister Trudeau for going to face the music, because there will be a lawyer there who is going to ask antagonistic questions. That's the way that these sorts of inquiries work. Everyone faces off in what amounts to a cross-examination of sorts. And so good on the Prime Minister for stepping forward. I hope, but I don't hold out too much hope, that he does give full answers as to why he declared the emergency, what was the information. Those are the things that we're supposed to find out from this inquiry based on the parameters that the government set. I'm not overly hopeful. I'm rather skeptical. I'll continue to watch. I'll continue to see how things go, and I'll call them out when need be. But if I'm going to call them out when they do something wrong, I have to say, good move on them here. Now, please, Prime Minister Trudeau, when you go, give full and clear answers, and don't just give us talking points.
Okay. Should be interesting to see what happens there. Now, the Trudeau government's push to regulate the internet through Bill C-11 is now caught up in the Senate, where the latest accusation is that the government attempted to bully a witness. So what can you tell us about this, Brian?
There's a group called Digital First Canada, and they represent creators who don't go on regular television like we're on right now. They don't go on regular radio. These are creators of podcasts or video series that you'll watch on YouTube, you'll watch on TikTok or another digital platform. And a Liberal MP named Chris Biddle, who is also the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Heritage. That's important to remember. He's the parliamentary secretary, the Minister of Heritage, the sponsor of this bill. He went and he accused this group of not revealing that they're paid lobbyists, except according to the lobbying commissioner, they're not. His issue was that Digital First Canada had received some funding from YouTube and TikTok. It related to a conference that they put on for creators on these platforms to show up. They paid for some of them to go and appear at the conference, to speak, to receive awards. Less than $100,000. I think it was $85,000. Which in the grand scheme of things, if you're putting on a big national conference, if you're a major national organization, that's not a ton of money. And by the way, even if it was a ton of money, it doesn't violate the rules. So, but having the parliamentary secretary to the minister putting forward this bill complain to the lobbying commissioner does amount to trying to shut this group up. This is the government trying to say, We don't want to hear from people who disagree with our legislation. Yes, they've been called before the Senate committee. Yes, they have something important to say. We think they should be shut up. We think that this other government organization should do our dirty work and stop them from speaking or discredit them in some way. That's the type of bullying that shouldn't go on at any level of government. When we're talking about the government trying to regulate the internet, and one of the major concerns is free speech, this goes well and above, well beyond the pale. This is something that should be completely unacceptable. MP Biddle, who had to apologize for nasty comments about another critic of the bill a little while ago, really should be taken to task. In fact, I think he should be fired. He's, if I'm being honest, he's not a person I think who belongs in Parliament. I think he embarrasses the legislature on a daily basis.
Well, Brian, unfortunately, we are out of time now, but it's so great to have you with us once again.
Thank you.
That was Brian Lilley, Toronto Sun columnist, joining us from Toronto.